welcome to episode 20 of the newly named Critical Fools podcast. We explained the name change last podcast, so I won't rehash that. But this week we're going to be discussing a 2016 film titled I, Daniel Blake, directed by Ken Loach. I'm going to let you take the floor because before I actually let you take the lead on this. So this was a film that actually I picked without. So I think we're both first-time viewers of this film. So this time I picked a film that I've heard about, and to give some color around how I heard about it was I've seen some of other the director's films, but also I'd heard that this was a good film about like the anxieties of austerity in Britain, and potentially could also explain why a lot of people felt like they had to vote for Brexit or politicians like Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson. So it was always on my to-do list, but you know how it is. It's hard to always get around to it. So I figured, this is a good opportunity, especially in the U.S. We're in election season, to pick a film that's about working class folks who are at the bottom, unfortunately, towards the bottom of the social ladder. So I'm curious to hear what your initial thoughts and also how you want to start off discussing this movie. So.
Yeah, so I'll just say, since you brought that up, I found this interesting that this movie was made in 2016 because that was the year that Brexit was voted, and you can kind of see why, they took a really raw look at the actual sort of inner workings of their, I forget what the job center, what would you call it? The bureaucracy surrounding the job center in Britain, and really a lot of the struggles that people who are trying to, who are in need of these benefits, trying to fill out all that paperwork, trying to navigate that bureaucratic nightmare is just a labyrinth, and it's especially hard for the older people. I think that was one of the big things that they wanted to show, was that, who's really getting hurt, arguably the most out of the working class, are really people who are older, because they're just not used to sort of the changing dynamics that society is going towards, specifically when it relates to technology, because the main character, Daniel Blake, is he's essentially just computer illiterate. And so as these different bureaucratic agencies try to expand all of their paperwork to online, a lot of these older people are sort of getting phased out and are not able to take advantage of a lot of the benefits, or at least apply for them. So it was just interesting because, they wanted to take really sort of a raw look at this sort of segment of the population in this film.
Yeah, I mean, to provide a little bit of extra info, is that we started this podcast during the coronavirus pandemic, and actually that's something that we in the United States, I read a lot about that. The systems are overwhelmed, they're confusing, they haven't been updated, or they're only some states have gone to virtual only, like you were saying, and has made it hard for people to get the benefits when they've been laid off in alarming rates.
Transition, yeah.
And I think it shows you that this film, in many ways, sadly, has aged well.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this now in the year 2020. Just to start at the beginning, to give some background to the first character, Daniel. This is a man that looks like he has no kids, but he had been married happily for a long time, but she had recently passed away, and he had worked most of his life as a carpenter in construction, right? And then he has a heart attack, and he's told by his doctors, you can't work, you need to slowly get your heart right, and then you can go back to working and living a normal life. And so he's thinking probably like most of us, naively, right? I'll just get the benefits for how long I need it for, and then because he looks like one of those old school I don't want to get extra handout, I just want to get through this.
Just want to work, man.
Yeah, and then I want to get back to my life. And if you remember the beginning, right? They basically treat him or treat many people who are in line, right? As if they're totally just a number, right? Wait your turn, the queue, stop making a disturbance. Oh, you need to fill out this form, sir, and you have to go online, you have to do all this. And he's just like, what is this? This is seems like it's more complicated than it needs to be, And I think often people who have to deal with bureaucracy, and you and I have done had to deal with this, and it's true. Sometimes it just feels extra convoluted for no reason. You have to get this notarized, you get this, and I had the patience to do it, but if I was in more dire straits, I'd be like, this is infuriating. Why are you making me go through hoops for this? I'm not trying to just milk it. There are people guilty of that and they're demonized, but I think this movie is trying to show that like there's a lot of people who pay taxes their whole life and they just need the one pick me up and they don't even get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the director was trying to sort of express with this film is pretty clear. It's really that, a lot of times systems don't really work the way that they should. And I mean, this guy was trying to go through all the hoops, and he's just saying, I feel like I'm just going in circles, right? They're telling me one thing, then they tell me another. And he's like, look, I'm just an old man. I just want my benefits because I had a major heart attack. And he's like, my doctor's telling me I can't work. I just want to recover and just get by until I can get back to work because that's all I want. And unfortunately, they're just saying, no. I love that opening scene where he's like, well, who are you asking these questions? Oh, I'm a healthcare professional. Which basically means like, it doesn't mean jack because this person was just contracted by an American company to assess people's health to rule in favor of not giving them benefits. That's basically the job of this person, because her response as a quote unquote healthcare professional went against the word of the doctor and the physiotherapist. Yeah, which is absurd because these are people with actual specialization. I'm sure this goes. I've never had to deal with this, but I'm sure this goes on in many parts of the developed world.
And that's a powerful scene, like you were saying, because it shows that like she has to say that term, because if she says she's anything like a doctor, he could sue because she's technically not a doctor. But she's like you said, it's one of those newer, fancier terms of like, oh, I'm a healthcare professional. Like when you hear
basically, she's someone who's a consultant who is meant to save the job center money. That agency. Yeah. That's all it is.
Yeah. Because we'll see it later, like towards the end of the films, right? The doctors, they tell his lawyer, right, that like they're furious that these decisions are being made because like they have shown all, like they have all the documents that like this is what the recommendation
all the data
is, right? Yeah, and it's like I said, it was just because they didn't want to, what they can't avoid it, they don't want to pay anything out. So during like his waiting in the queue, he befriends Katie, right, who was a single mom with 2 kids. I'm interested in what your thoughts on her character, because if Daniel represents, like you were saying, like this blue collar, old elderly person, she represents kind of like the, maybe unfortunately had a kid too young, or the dad bolted and like she had to be she's trying to get any benefit she can, so she's relocated to Newcastle. It's interesting the setting too, Newcastle, because that was one of those cities that was affected harshly by Thatcher's policies and free market and outsourcing and stuff. So I found the filming location to be intriguing as well. But that's beside the point. Like it was filmed in Newcastle. But I'm going to get your thoughts on her character, and her like what she kind of represented in the movie.
Yeah, before I get to her character, I found the choice of Newcastle. I'm sure they did it intentionally. I don't quite know like that much about Newcastle's economy specifically. I imagine it's more of a working town kind of feel, as opposed to like say a city like London, which is very international. And so it was just interesting, but obviously I can see why they made that the focus of this film, or for the setting, that being the town. But as far as a single mother, Katie, her character was interesting because I see what they were trying to do. In many ways, she's very different from Daniel, but in many ways she's similar because they come from the same position. I mean, Daniel doesn't have any kids of his own, but she has 2. She's younger for one, and he's much older. And she also comes from London, whereas it makes it seem like he's lived in Newcastle pretty much his entire life. At least that's what I'm gathering. So in many ways, there's a lot of these differences, and yet at the same time, they still are both from, they're both working class, essentially, and they're both getting phased out by the system, by these austerity measures, by the fact that the job center doesn't really want to give them any employment benefits, or what are they called? The employment and support allowance, right?
Yeah,
they don't want to give them
allowance there a lot, yeah.
Yeah, they don't want to give them any of those benefits, right? So their job is to basically assess and deny their claims to sort of save money. And so then they push them to go into the job seekers, but then they give them the runaround. They say even when you're looking for a job, basically, in order to qualify for the benefits, for the benefits that they provide, you basically looking for a job is essentially a job in and of itself, because they say you have to be looking for a job 35 hours a week. Just nuts, right? Especially in today's day and age where you can just send your resume off electronically and that be done. What else are you going to do to find a job? Like, that's just pretty wild to me. And it seemed like at that time that at least in 2016, it seemed as if in Newcastle, there just weren't a lot of jobs, period. So that makes their seeking a job even harder, or that much harder.
I think so, especially where we're like Daniel, where he works in, it was probably really competitive too. A lot of people trying to get any steady, or not even steady work, just like odd jobs.
Well, you're talking like even at the CV work, quote unquote, CV workshop. What did it say? It was like for every job for lower class or like blue collar job, it's like 20 to 25 applications per one job. So it's just a lot of people looking for work.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that workshop. Oh yeah, don't get me started.
I loved what did he say about the coffee? He's like, oh, we like he was making a smart aleck kind of comment where he's like, oh, we should be drinking more coffee then, because he's talking about the amount of people applying at the coffee shop.
Yeah, that whole workshop was brutal, but it also reflected a lot about like how like modern society is, where like that quote of like you need your resume to stand out. I mean, you and I have probably been hearing that since we were like teenagers, right? Like you got to stand out.
Bro, since I applied for my first job, yeah,
it's like you have to stand out, be different. But you see in that workshop how you're going to be different when everybody's doing the same kind of workshop, right? That's what I kind of like when I was watching that scene. I was just like, it seems like we're only really rewarding certain types of work and certain types of behavior, but that's like a bigger discussion to have maybe later. I also was like, this movie, it's interesting how like when I watched it, I only watched it once, but my initial thoughts was like, oh, the good movie, and I had a sort of number in my head of what I was going to rate it when we get there. But what happens is the more I reflected on certain scenes, it's almost more to the director's credit that there are subtle scenes in this film that really like stick with you. I'm thinking there's many. Yeah. There's many, but like one of the earlier ones is kind of like when he's struggling with the computer, he's asking for help, and like and then the lady at the unemployment office, she kind of gives you the foreshadowing, like even like in a really subtle way, where like she says like, I've seen so many people like you, good people, who end up on the street or worse because nobody's there just to take the hour. And she was trying to do that, right? Take the hour to fill it with you, because these are all questions that you know the answers to, but you just don't know how to do it. And then her manager goes like, you need to come with me.
Because you're setting you can't do that because you're setting a precedent. Is what
you're setting a precedent, right? And like it's inappropriate and stuff and favoritism. I was just like, man, there's so many things in this movie that I was afraid to punch. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this man pays taxes only for the governmental agency to not be there to help him when he needs it.
Yeah,
that's what's infuriating is and it's very true. I mean, both my parents worked in government, so like they've seen a lot of bureaucracy. I've interacted with many bureaucratic institutions. I've had some very good interactions with some, and some awful ones with others. And really, what they were trying to show is, there are people that really do want to help you, but there are also people that are not, and these institutions are not necessarily built to be the most helpful towards the taxpayers. That's bottom line what it is. Yeah, I'm sure you've had similar experiences, right? Yeah, if I were to guess.
But true, but you bring up a good point where you probably had more experience with some of the the inside of the.
I've heard stories. That's all. I will leave it at that.
So I couldn't have said it better myself. There were so many scenes in this film that I felt like I just wanted to hit something, because it was just really gut punching. Like I messaged you earlier in the week that this film felt like a lot of gut punches, like. Because the sad part is that, like, oh, I wish it was fictionalized, but this happened.
No, it's not fictionalized at all.
And it's brutal. And I give the director credit, because it's hard to make that a movie, right? It's easier to make it a documentary. But to make it a movie, to craft it a movie, it's not really, it's not a bad word, but it's not really sexy, it's not what sells. It's not really an epic tale. It's kind of like
No, man, this is just everyday life raw.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
yeah, but still crafted with as a story with some really powerful scenes. So it got me thinking, like,
100%.
this movie is actually better, like, maybe a tad underrated. I was about to give it a different rating.
Dude, it was. The other scene that just killed me was there were a couple, but
the
when
food bank,
the food bank was brutal. But I'm thinking of when the daughter wakes the mom up at night to like sleep with her, and she's like, "What's wrong?" She's like, "Kids at the school are making fun of me." She's like, "Why?" She's like, "Cause my shoes fell apart." She's like, "But we glued them." Yeah, but they fell apart again. I was just like, oh man, that's just absolutely raw. Because I remember being a kid, and yeah, on the playground, kids were absolutely ruthless, and she just doesn't. And I just felt so bad for the mom at so many times. I mean, I'm sure there were some decisions she made that just weren't the wisest, obviously. But I mean, you can't help but feel that she just wants to give all to her kids at that moment, and she can't. You're just not in that position to do so, right? And so it was just brutal because all this kid wants is just some shoes so that she's treated normally. That scene really killed me quite a bit because that has a big impact on kids when you grow up that poor on their self-esteem.
That's true. I think that there's a lot of studies around that too. Yeah, I mean, so maybe going back to something a little bit funnier. So Daniel's neighbor is I forgot his name.
Dude, I love his character.
Yeah, they were so funny, right? They were so funny. But
wait, when he's like, "Oh, I got a mate in Guangzhou at the factory," he gets to me like, "I got the factory connect." I was like, "This guy." I was like, everyone's about to sneak. And what's funny is I know people who've done that or who are into that. Yo, I got this connect. They're all about the sneaker game, all about reselling shoes. That's what made me laugh.
And there's what's interesting is that he also has a line where he tells Daniel, like, you're gonna try to get the benefits, and he tells him, like, hey, be careful because they really make you,
No, that was the other thing that killed me too. He's like, you mean they could have just printed it out and give it to me right then and there? He's like, yeah, it's that easy. And he's like, but they do everything in their power to make it difficult for you.
That's what he warns him, yeah. But also his character, one of the also important scenes you're hinting at is that, and I want to get his name, but I can't remember. Maybe I'll look it up in a sec. But how he gets he gets the shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that's a really subtle way to say, like, how come these shoes, when they come directly from the factory, the same shoes, is basically a fraction of the cost. Like, he can sell it out of his car, but if he buys it in the store, it's marked up like $150.
Well, because the system is made to maximize profit.
It's true, but also there is.
That's what capitalism is partly about. Is complete. If you just let it run free, just complete maximization of profit.
That is true, but I think also it shows that, like, the laborer, even in China, who's working like probably long hours, is not as valuable. Like, I agree with the capitalism thing, but I think there's a subtle critique of the factory worker isn't as valuable as the guy working at Nike marketing, because he probably makes more than the factory worker, and he gets probably benefits, but also that markup is probably factored in those. Well,
I love because I don't know what exactly that character's role is, but he said that he was like, he goes and tries to unload trucks, and I love that scene where he's like, he's like, man, he's like, I got called into work today. He's like, we unloaded one truck. Do you know how long it took? 45 minutes. You know how much I earned today from this? For like 3 pound and like 70 quid. And he's like, this is crap, man. He's like, that's what I'm trying to get in the sneaker game to basically subsidize. He's like, where I can upsell and make 90 pound per shoe. And so, but what that scene really reminded me of, I was like, man, it's brutal being in that level of the working class. So it really reminded me of, I think we brought up this reference before in The Wire, when they focus on the dock workers, they sort of talk about the impacts of globalization within this season and how a lot of the characters who are working the docks in Baltimore, they can't work most days because there's no ships coming in. And so their pay is dependent on that. And it's just brutal when you have a profession that is dependent upon, a large volume of vessels that you need to unload.
Yeah, I looked it up, but so I guess his name is China because he gets all those packages from China. That's his nickname. I don't know his actual like what's his real name, but I guess Daniel calls him China all throughout the movie. So
Well, he does because he says that he got the package from China. Yeah, that was funny though. Yeah, he's on that sneaker side hustle.
Yeah, and then when they Skype the
guy from Guangzhou, I was dying of laughter with their
and
whole
then, the Premier League stuff, and it's true. Like the Chinese are very big fans of the English.
Huge. Well, China is a big market for sporting fans across the world, whether it be the Premier League or the NBA here.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
But yeah, anyway. Oh, do you want to get to the food bank scene?
I want to see if we need to set it up or anything, right? So so Daniel meets Katie in line. What's nice about the beginning and why in the end it turns really bad is that you see that Daniel is like helping her. Like he's like, okay, I don't have a job and I'm pretty much free and I'm trying to figure out my case.
Well, it's not that he's lonely too.
But he's like, he's lonely now because his wife passed away. And he's like, I can do something here. And then he like helps out. Like those little things, they help her a lot. She's trying to juggle like work and then like her kids and like her school. She had a lot on her plate, to be honest with you, which to your point, I think it was a bit too much. But I think I've come across many people when I was helping at the university level advise students that they just had a lot going on. And sometimes I was like, you're not set up for success because you can't focus on 4 different things at once.
So the one thing I will say is that, it was just, it was sort of a perfect match, right? Because he's a handyman. She is new in town with 2 kids, and they both kind of needed each other for that friendship. And they both knew what was going on with the other person because they were both trying to navigate the labyrinth and the complicated. I'm trying to figure out the word. They're trying to figure out this complex Byzantine almost system that Britain had created, which was the job seekers agency. And so they both were struggling with that and they found a common connection. So because of that common connection, then they both started becoming friends and realized that they were both sort of in need of each other.
Yeah. And those were kind of like it's sad to say, but those were kind of some of the high points.
Man. It was just him. One of the more touching scenes is obviously when he's talking to her daughter, right? And he's fixing up her room. I found it cool, interesting. They were, and that just goes to show because I've never been in this position. It's tragic that anyone really goes through this. But even the little necks, like, how are we we don't have any heating or AC or anything like that. No way to really keep this warm. So Daniel sort of shows all the tricks that, working class people go through. So one of them was putting some of the popcorn packaging on the window, just so because all the bubbles will keep the heat once the sun comes in and it will slightly heat the room. I was like, man, that's another level of really poverty that it's just like, that's pretty gut-wrenching.
Yeah, I agree.
But one of the sweet and nice things is like they're doing that, but to give the daughter some semblance of hope, he's an artist and makes some very nice pieces, and so he custom made her some wind chimes that were going to go right there in her room. So that was a nice little heartfelt touch.
Yeah, because he is a skilled carpenter. That's something that I think was, I think often the media or the elite class, they tend to demonize like people like, oh, retrain, get a job. We've heard it all. But like he actually,
I don't even want to go into that.
But he actually has legit skills. It's not like he's somebody that like literally can't do anything other than lift boxes. Like he actually had a craft. Maybe it's not as valuable as it once was, but he has a craft. Like you see that in the movie that like you said, you see the woodwork, like one that you just mentioned, but also before he unfortunately sells his stuff. All the stuff he has around it looks like he has, he has
custom-made pieces.
Yeah, so it's not like he didn't have skills. Not like that's what makes this movie brutal sometimes, is because that it was a lot of unnecessary moments in this film. At least with Daniel.
So to your point, and since you brought it up with retraining programs, I think what advocates of that will make this slightly political, because that does get a bit annoying when a lot of jobs retraining programs come up. And it kind of ties into this character, because I think a lot of people would say when he is going out for work is like, Well, you don't know, essentially that society is progressing to the point where you need to be computer literate. You need to do that, and you need to be retrained, and then you'll be successful. Blah blah blah. And it's like when people talk about jobs or training programs, we talk about people as if they are infinitely malleable. At least it seems to me in my perspective. And in the case of someone like Daniel and a lot of people, it's like we're not robots that can just be retrained, reprogrammed, and to do whatever. There's a level of human limitation there with everybody where it's like you're pretty good with your specific skill set and you have some pros and cons with you, but it's not like you could just be interplaced to do. You can't do X job. X job is gone now. We're going to give you some skills, and then you're all of a sudden going to do Y. It's not how it works. Some people don't have the personality for specific jobs either, or the skill set. We're not. I would say, and that's the point of this. One of the points of this film is like you're starting to not look at people as humans. You're starting just to look at them as numbers, and you need to start looking at people with the humanity and what makes them sort of themselves.
Yeah, I think that's 100% what the director was going for. I think you just hit on the nail. I think the big thing here, outside of all the characters, is that we, as a society now, especially let's say in liberal democracies, we view more and more people by numbers, right? Whether that's polls, whether that's the budget, whether that's the ROI, return on investment. We view people as numbers, and I think the question posed in this film is a powerful one, saying like, is this the kind of society we really want? That we only value people if they're productive, if they are valuable, if there's an ROI on it, and otherwise you're okay. You die, too bad. The next man up. And I think there is a conversation to be had. I mean, I think it's still going on actually, because unfortunately,
it's gonna get worse. Yeah,
it hasn't changed unfortunately in many ways. But yeah, I think that leads us into like the food bank scene, which honestly, it took me.
These are. No, I could see it building up really, and it gets you with the emotion at that moment. But you could see where it was going and why she did that.
I saw like the little hints that she was eating the fruit.
She's like but fruit.
Honestly, in my mind, I thought like she was going to take the food and kind of like rush home, but she couldn't even hold it that long. I guess as soon as she saw the food, it just triggered. I was just like, "Oh, this is so brutal. This is so."
It was a brutal scene. Like there were several incredibly brutal scenes within this, and it makes it feel like it's you would hope it's a documentary that it would just be pure fiction, but I'm sure this stuff goes on all the time. I mean, I volunteered in food banks before. You see basically every end of the spectrum there. But it's sad because a lot of these people are just getting left behind, phased out of the society, and so they're being put on the sidelines. That's more and more people, right? You saw the extended line at the food bank at that point. And yeah, it was super gut wrenching when you just see that kind lady is helping her go through, fill up her order, and then she just sees like the can of tomatoes, pops it open, and starts shoving her face with it because she's that hungry that she's going to faint. It was for effect, man. That was one of the most powerful scenes in this film for sure. I mean, it was so sad.
Yeah, I think it's the most powerful scene. Also, in that scene.
No. There's one other scene that was also absolutely brutal in this film too.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I had to like turn away when that scene happened. I'm laughing, but it's not really a happy laugh.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I paused it. I walked away for a minute, and then I came back.
I was like, you gotta be kidding me with this movie, dude. But like, there's how like a couple episodes back, you had a good criticism about like in the French movie we discussed that like the foreshadowing was over the top. I had no idea that the tampon thing would tie in the way it did, and because she asked her, "Do you have tampons?" In the food bank, and they're like, "Oh, we don't carry that, unfortunately." Mm-hmm. And later she's trying to steal it, right? Because she doesn't have.
I was sad.
And then that also eventually ties into, I think that.
Yeah, everything else. Yeah.
But so speaking of, we're talking about society a lot. But sorry, let me just go real quick.
Go ahead.
We've been talking about the themes and stuff, but I want to say, at least on a film analysis level, that was a good way to how everything kind of tied in. It didn't feel like forced or on the nose. Like it's good story crafting, good directing. So I just want to say that part. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, for sure. For some of the foreshadowing elements, it's there, but it's not like I hate when like films kind of beat you over the nose with like stuff. I like sort of subtlety when it's put into writing in films, and I thought that this. I mean, you could see like looking back where some of the things are starting to get foreshadowed, but you couldn't pick them out right away. It's not like within that French film that you're talking about. Let me stare at the wheelchair for about 30 seconds. Well, why are you looking at the wheelchair? I don't know. I was just drawn to it. Wow. Oh, that was so subtle. Like, that was absurd in a way. And I'd seen a lot of film reviews praising this film, and no one picked that out. I'm like, how are you guys, like, as film critics, like, okay with, like, this level of just, like, on the note or beat you over the head with this foreshadowing?
I do have an answer, but let's continue.
Anyway. Oh, yeah, but what really made that scene at the food bank just, I think, that much more powerful was just the fact that, you know, people are trying to comfort her, and she's just like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what over. I just had to eat," and she just keeps profusely apologizing. Like, man, she just feels that level of remorse for just eating there and kind of making a scene. But it's like you just feel for her because like she's at such a low point at that moment. It was from a directing standpoint, man. They really pulled at your heartstrings there.
Yeah. And somehow we get to a lower point, which I didn't think was possible. I actually did not think it was possible in the movie. I thought like, okay, this is the zenith. This is like the scene that's like really crystallizes the movie, and then I was just like, you gotta be kidding.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, things don't really get better for Katie. She ends up trying to. I can't remember if it's before or after the scene, but she ends up trying to, find employment opportunities. And what was really sad was her trying to clean the tub and the tile broke. And it's just like she's like, no matter what I do, things just seem to be literally at that point. It's representative. Things just seem to be falling apart all around her, right? And she kind of has a moment where it's just like it doesn't seem like anything is going to get better. But because she's sort of a house cleaner, she puts on ads, looks for jobs everywhere, and with no luck, right? She's not able to find any employment anywhere. And what ends up happening is she ends up, like you were saying, stealing some items that in a local supermarket. And, you know, it was very nice of him to do so. But the manager says, look, you look like you're sort of just out of your luck. And some of the items were obviously for her kids. So he basically said, I'm going to cut your break. These items are paid for. And so he lets her walk away. And then obviously she has an interaction with the security guard where he basically says, hey, like, look, I'm sorry for that earlier. If you need help, like, I can have, like, opportunities for you. You don't really know what they are, but you don't really get a good feeling out of it. At least I didn't from it. I'm like, oh, no. Like, there's something there. And you figure out later on.
Unfortunately, I've done a decent amount of reading around like what happened, like how people end up as sex workers, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions where people think that it's like obviously there's many people who do it who are like, you know, it's legal like in some places in Europe, and they actually do it as their job and they write books and blogs, whatever. But there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are trafficked, right, from other countries.
It's a mix, right, and it's hard to. For something, it's hard to define something homogenously when there's just many different reasons why people might go into that. And unfortunately, it was just sheer desperation.
Yeah, but what I will say is that for the majority, whether that's you're trafficked in because you want a better life, it's usually economic reasons. It's for the most part, this kind of a myth that like, oh, if it was legal, it would just be better. Is I think unlike marijuana, I don't think it's that clear cut.
No, I think in some ways I think in some ways it would, and in many other ways it would not. Yeah. Right? It's a complicated topic, and yeah, in this case, it was tough because she can't find any work. There's little that she could do. She has 2 kids, and she wants to be able to provide for them. I mean, she complains about how she like can't even buy fruit, really fresh fruit. And unfortunately, she takes up the opportunity that the security guard provided for her, which was making a connection to what would amount by, I'm not too familiar with this world or terminology, essentially like someone who runs a brothel, kind of like a pimp. I'm not sure,
It's
or
an
like the head
escort.
lady.
It's an escort service with a what they call the
Okay,
head ladies like
I can't remember.
madams or something.
Madams, that's right. So
Um,
she's a madam, and she takes up this opportunity basically, and it's so sad because you just really these people really do manipulate and take advantage of people who are just down on luck. She's like, it's okay, we're gonna take care of you, everything's gonna be better. Just providing that sense of relief, and it's sad because you're just taking advantage of someone who is literally on their last legs. This is their only other. They can't see any way out, really,
yeah.
and so they go through this. And it was man, that was brutal. Like
Good.
this film just kept getting lower and lower in
And
terms of
I
like
do want to break down
your
that
emotion.
scene because it's crafted very well. But before we do that,
Yeah.
what you said about the house was, I think, again, I give credit to the director who's been doing this for a while. So he's one of those legendary directors. The
Mm-hmm.
house falling apart, I think, is very subtle, clear symbolism of her life falling apart, and also how fragile everything is, right? Because she is, just cleaning the tub and it just breaks, like as if
Falls
like,
off because the ground
yeah,
grabs. I mean, it's
yeah.
it's not the best house.
Yeah, and I think it's a clear like
It's a
symbol
metaphor. Yeah.
of like these people in these kind of situations, they're basically one bad luck event away from being really in dire straits. And actually, we do see this with Daniel, right? That like he didn't get approved for the benefits, so he has to start selling his stuff. He becomes even more isolated because now he doesn't even have any of the things that remind him of his wife and things like that. And he had the falling out, and that happens after we'll get into that powerful scene. But you see that like like you said like earlier, like society is just pushing these guys or pushing these individuals out because they're no longer needed, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
like in their point of view, and they're becoming more and more desperate. And like they're like you said, they're one bad, or what I was saying, they're one bad luck or one bad event to being like it's over. It
Yeah.
was at one point in this movie, I still wasn't actually expecting the way it did happen, but I was convinced that somebody was going to commit suicide. And it was getting that depressing. I was like,
Yeah.
like, this is getting so brutal that like I can't. How is this car crash like moving so slowly? Dude? But
I guess
yeah,
it's real
so
life, man. That's what they were trying to show.
yeah, so to give the backdrop, right, as you were saying, so Katie
Mm-hmm.
gets really desperate. Daniel, by coincidence, which you could argue that's a maybe on the nose, he finds the number right on the ground escort service, right? And instead of
But
approaching her,
it slipped out of her purse.
yeah, instead of approaching her, but you could say it's a bit of a Deus Ex where like it happens to fall out of her purse, right? But
Yeah, I mean, they had to find a way for him to discover what she was actually doing. Because
yeah,
she said it was a parent-teacher conference, and it wasn't.
it wasn't.
Yeah.
So he actually ends up going to the brothel, and how it's presented to the viewer, and because I think for the most part we see the movie through Daniel's eyes. There's most of the scenes are basically him interacting with Katie, him interacting with the office worker, him seeing the interaction with not the office, with the benefits worker when Katie has the spat. Yeah, he goes and he opens the door, and yeah, dude, I was just like, wow, like she's there like half naked, and like, she feels ashamed because she knows like
she's ashamed.
That,
He's just like heartbroken.
He's heartbroken, and
seeing her going down
right.
this path. Yeah, he's heartbroken seeing her going down this. It was, yeah, that was a very brutal, raw scene.
Yeah, it's and like you were saying, like she's ashamed, but also if it was just like she was already seeing random men, but she genuinely, I think they did form a friendship, and I think
yeah,
it hurt.
No, they were. He was a father figure to her in the film.
Yeah. And they have that scene outside where she tells him, "Look, I have to do this because like I need money in the pocket."
And no, he's like, the thing that the line that absolutely killed me was when he said, "Look, we can go home right now. I bought you a bookshelf for your books," and I was just like, "Oh God," because it's always that hope, like you can do better. Like I have hope, I have faith in you, and it's just like, man, that was that was very good writing. And man, it just tugs at your emotions there.
Yeah, because like she mentions earlier in the movie, right, that she wants to
She wants to go to university.
Yeah, get her life right, but ends up working as a escort, basically.
Yeah.
Basically, like the ending of this, we'll get there, but basically nothing got better for anybody.
Mhm.
and because she's still probably working as an escort, if it's just fictionalized, but in this, let's say it's a
In this scenario,
if
yeah.
we were to continue the sequel, which I would not see, uh, one person is, spoiler, is gone, and the other person is basically going to probably continue doing the escort work.
Yeah, getting left behind from the system.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's just brutal. Now, before we get, because we're right heading towards, like, I would say, like the later half of this film.
Oh,
What did
we're
you
way
think?
past the later half of this
Yeah,
film.
what did you think of the portrayals of, like? I have to give credit to the people who, I don't know their names, but the actors who did the job center workers. They did like portray like the coldness of bureaucracy very well, right? I mean, they were like pretty crisp and
Well,
like,
no. So that's one thing I will say is like, and that's why I say I'll give them credit because they showed that like how a lot of people who work in bureaucratic positions can be, the stereotypical cold, like it's just a job. I'm not really here to help you. And then, but they included a couple that were more on the helpful side, like Anna. And there are those two sides where you get some people who really do go into that line of work because they do want to help people in terms of government, help them through these processes. And then you get the ones where it's like, no, like it's not my job to help you. It's just me being here. Like my job is to provide you with the paperwork you have to figure out on your own. Like the non-helpful people. And yeah, from an acting standpoint, they were great. But yeah, I think they portrayed a lot of bureaucratic institutions pretty honestly.
yeah, that blonde lady,
Unfortunately,
it was just driving me up a wall. Like when she was
the
like
one,
I
which
forgot
is
her name.
cool, and yeah, there
Yeah,
are people like that.
yeah, it's crazy. But we actually skipped a very important scene, the title of the movie when he does the graffiti.
Oh yeah,
That was also a great
fantastic
scene.
scene.
Yeah. And he just tells him like, I'm gonna do this every day until like I get my day in court.
He gave me some Occupy Wall Street type vibes. Occupy Wall Street type vibes there. When he's just like people were just so fed up at that. Like he's just fed up, and then he sort of unites all the random people walking there.
Yeah.
Right? He's like you, and he's like, how could? Oh, I love that one guy. How could you do this? Who calls like security? He's like, you left me no choice. He's like, you wouldn't help me. I can't really work with computers. I don't have any other options. I'm putting out my benefits. This is all I can do.
Yeah. He was
Right?
pushed to the
And it was
brink,
powerful
basically.
because sometimes statements like that, sit-ins are really how you start to change things, or at least see people's perspective of what's really going on. Because he could have just walked out of the building and not done that. No one would have known around him. But he's like, well, forget this. I'm at least going to draw attention to the absurdity that is this institution and how this institution is running. And I love that other guy who like touts him. Are you Daniel Blake? And it's like
Yeah.
another guy who's like clearly been
This is
screwed by
another
the
homeless
system.
guy. Yeah, he's like, I've been screwed too. Hero.
Yeah.
I was like, I was kind of dying too, but then they arrested him and they're like, they came out, they weren't too happy. And then, at the police station, they tell him he's getting off because he has a clean record, at least this time. But you
Yeah, but
realize that
I love it. I mean,
he's fighting the
because
system.
some displays of like that are just necessary to try to even change things, or at least to get people to know what's really going on.
Yeah. And then
So
there's
I thought that was a great scene.
yeah, and there's also little scenes like when Daisy, like Katie's daughter, like visits, and it was
That's what
kind
I
of
was gonna. So that happens right after that. So I
yeah,
was gonna point to it.
I was gonna say it was half cute where like she's peeping through the was it like the what do they call this
Yeah,
hole?
man.
But
It's a
like
mail hole. The
mail hole,
mail.
yeah. And like there's nothing there, and like yeah, I'll let you like talk more about the scene, but yeah,
So
it's
yeah, I mean, it's one of the more subtle scenes. And it's not really over the top in terms of the dramaticness or like the emotion that it tries to get out of you, but it still is still. I still find it pretty powerful when he says, "No, Daisy, like now is not a good time. He's obviously super depressed, and things aren't going well for him, right?" And then you just see, and sometimes, the smallest little action can really uplift people. In general, you just see that she brings him like a plate of couscous. He's like, no, not now. Just please go away. Go back to like your mom. And he's like, Daniel, can I ask you something? Do you like help us? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, well, then why won't you let me help you? At that point, he realizes, okay, like just sort of the goodness or pureness of her heart. He lets her in, and it really changes his mood. That was sadly, that was one of the big high points of this film.
Yeah.
Was that little interaction.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're right. I mean, the kids were kind of like, it was brutal at times, but also they were kind of like, like kids, like they were kind of funny. They were,
Well, yeah, that was one of the high points. The other point I think we sort of glossed over was when he finally gets the boy to open up a little more.
Yeah, Dylan. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was because he basically tells him he's trying to like open up and trying to get him out of his introverted self, and so he asks him, "Hey, how many? Let me ask you a question. How many? What kills more people, coconuts or sharks?" And he wouldn't respond except for like a lot of times past at dinner, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, Daniel, I haven't answered your question. Coconuts." And they're like, "What?" And it's like you can see him start to actually help this kid get out of his introverted phase and become more comfortable living in Newcastle.
Yeah.
But sadly, those two interactions with those kids are two of the highlights, or like the high points.
Yeah, another scene that's like, I think there's a lot of scenes in this film that like are short, but they actually when we get to the ratings, I'm gonna have a little long, not rant, but like a speech, because like I struggle to really place this movie. But there is a scene where he's been looking for work, so we're going back a bit. I would say like middle-ish, right? He's been looking for work. He's been walking around. He has that good interaction with that one employer, if you recall, and he calls him saying like, "I'd like to bring you for an interview."
Anna?
No, not Anna. The guy, the hiring manager. Right? He calls him saying,
right.
"Hey, I would like to bring you in for an interview," because he liked his resume. And Daniel has to be honest, saying like, "Look, I actually can't work." And then he says like, "Yeah, I'm trying to get like." Daniel didn't do himself favors by saying like, "I'm trying to get benefits right away," and so he just called him like, "Oh, you're just like the typical like lazy."
Just wasting my time.
Yeah, but like he said it was complicated, but obviously the other person's gonna obviously assume like
he's gonna assume the worst.
Yeah, that you're just trying to do the minimum to get like the free taxpayer benefit, but obviously his situation is that like he's being forced to look for work even though the doctors have told him not to. So I will say that like I understand why that scene was in there, because I think it was trying to show the audience that like we often just think that like everybody's a welfare queen, but it's not always so clear cut. I will say that like realistically, I think in a real life phone call, I think the person would say, even when like meet the first time, saying like I have to be honest, I'm just looking for work because the state is literally forcing me, but my doctor says I can't. So this is my situation, unfortunately. But maybe because he's private or macho, he didn't want to say that. But I think that like it is my interpretation, but I think like most people at least try to like explain themselves first why they really can't go for the interview. Like I do that even myself when I'm trying to make up an excuse.
Sure.
But I
Dude,
think
he comes from I will just say he comes from a different era than you and I do, though.
That is true, but I also think that scene was there. Like I said, I think it's the director kind of sending a message about we tend to group everybody who needs welfare in one bucket, and it's not really that black and white, even though the politicians talk like that.
So do you want to hear? By the way, so I did read some response because obviously this generated some buzz in Britain at the time of its release. So, according to the former Conservative Work and Pensions Secretary, Liam Duncan Smith, this is what he said on the film. He said that the portrayal of the movie of the job center staff was unfair. He says, I quote, "This idea that everybody is out to crunch you, I think it has really hurt the job center staff who don't see themselves as that or in that role." And then the producer sort of responded to him saying that he just lives in basically you're delusional and that you live in a cloud cuckoo land, which is which is pretty funny. But I was like, the arrogance of this dude he's a career politician in Britain, one of the Tories, who's probably never had to deal with a job like applying through the job center before.
So I do want to get to the ending, but to jump on this kind of like tangent a little bit. So I saw an interview with BBC where he was like talking about his film, promoting it probably. And so they have him, the director, and they have a guy that's like basically in the conservative government. And I don't want to bash the conservative Tories, but let's just say it's a politician. I will ignore the party. And they're talking about the movie, a moderator, right? And then the other guy says, "I haven't seen the." No, he literally says this. "I haven't seen the movie yet, but these depictions are probably like over the top." I was like, "You haven't seen the movie, so how can you say that even?" I was just like, this is such political speak, as they say. Like, he knows he has to toe the line because he can really, even without the movie, just seeing the trailer, probably you can get the sense. But like, how could you like start taking like, like basically critiquing the movie without like actually like seeing the movie? But I think it speaks a lot about how like our politicians today, no matter what country,
they're out of touch.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to.
And they also have to defend their own positions and narratives. So
sure, but I just think it's ridiculous when they speak on things that they more likely than not have never had to deal with themselves, and act like they know exactly what it is. Like, dude, most of these politicians, the Tories or the leaders of the Labour Party, most of them have probably never had to deal with the job center staff or applying or going through that process.
Yeah.
So to try to act like you know something about something that you've never actually had to go through yourself is pretty arrogant to me.
It's super
arrogant. But that's how politicians are. That's why I was just like, I chuckled. I was like, okay, well, you have this critique, even though, yeah, you probably have never had to actually go into a job center building yourself. You just write laws that end up someone implements. But anyway, sorry, that was a little tangent, a little annoyance on my end about bureaucracy.
So I think what's left is, unless there's any other, I'm trying to think of other scenes. There's little scenes in there, but I think we haven't really discussed, like, I think that, but I'm going to say final nail in the coffin sequence of the movie.
Yeah, it was just really sad. It just goes into the sort of in line with this film that as soon as something looks like it's going to go right, it just ends poorly. And unfortunately, Daniel ends up passing away from a heart attack. And then Katie ends up reading at his funeral, just sort of giving a eulogy, which ends up being what he was going to say to the deciding board that was going to look at his appeal.
Which is actually a good speech that I actually listened to twice. But you're right. But speaking to your, like, the Hope thing that happens a lot in the film where the Hope gets stripped away, with the interaction with the lawyer, I remember thinking, like, okay, this movie's brutal, but maybe, he'll get, like, I was thinking there would be like a twist, like, oh, well, he'll get, like, he won't get any of the lost wages, like, it'll be from now on forward, or, some BS that the government does always, right? Because he was without money for a while, right? And that's why he sold this stuff. And then the lawyer says, like, look, I've seen this 100 times before. The doctors are on our side. We have a really strong case. And I mean, everything based on everything we see in the film, I believe that, even though I knew that there would be shortchanged somewhere.
Yeah.
And to him to just die on the bathroom, I was just like, I don't want to cuss, but I was just like, God, this movie, dude. Like, on the bathroom floor, and I was like, oh my goodness, man. Like, you can't do this. This movie was brutal. It's like a different type of brutal.
I think in reality, though, if this actually happened, I think China would have been there too, because China did really care about him.
Oh yeah. And so I want to speak to that death. Apparently, like, Daniel Blake is fictionalized, but he's based on many characters, and actually somebody did, like, die of a heart attack, like, around the period.
In a bathroom?
I don't know.
Does that surprise you?
Not the bathroom.
But but it was like during this time of like 2010-ish to 2016. Yeah, there was incredible austerity going on based on, issues economically within the Eurozone. And that's why a lot of people, how do I say this without being too, I guess, antagonistic, is a lot of people here in the U.S. that I talked to were like just weren't aware of sort of Britain and Britain's politics. And they were saying, like, how stupid can you be to be leaving the Euro or the Eurozone? Basically, they were bashing Brexit, right? And it's like, well, you don't really understand all the dynamics of really what's going on in Britain. And I had the sense that at least some people in the system were sort of getting squeezed out on the sidelines. So it's really not that surprising that, something like this could happen, that people may not or may want to look for an alternative. Sort of austerity.
That's a we're gonna leave it at that.
A hot button issue. We can leave it. You get what I'm saying, though. It's that not every system's hold on. Let me finish. Not every system's perfect, and any point, like some people can get left on the sideline. So it's not surprising when they would sort of vote for something like that out of desperation.
The reason I say it's a loaded topic is because you know, I'm somebody who has followed pretty closely, especially leading up to Brexit, years before Brexit was a thing. You know, the rise of, I think, what they call like a new Labour, not Tony Blair's Labour, but I'm going to say this is kind of like the democratic socialists we see here in America. It was the rise of Corbyn,
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn, of course.
And even Boris Johnson, which I have another film that we can discuss in the future that kind of explains his rise. But I'm holding that off because I want to do something. After this review, I was like, I need some mix up. I need to mix it up a little bit. Like, this is brutal.
We're, by the way, just a heads up, we're going to be mixing it up with my film choice for next week, so don't worry.
Oh, so that's perfect timing. Yeah, this was like, I was like, I was happy. So to give context to listeners, I've been rolling the dice a couple of times. It's been paying off. So I was like, I got to keep it going. But now it's like,
Burning was an A1 choice, and you did that on the fly.
Yeah, I was like, you know, these on the fly ones, you know, they're not bad. So you're right. I think people, like, when they look at, and this is what you said earlier is actually something that I've heard from the people in London too, that, like, you know, it would be dumb to leave the EU. But I think what they forget is that, like, your experience in that economy or in that society, it may not be the same experience as people living in Newcastle, Birmingham, or Liverpool. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people think that if you're not, I think this is why we have the system we do now. Is I think a lot of people buy into that, you know, their own self-worth, their own ego, that, oh, the society is working for me. I'm living nicely in London. I have a good salary. I have a good like, you know, good benefits. I get to travel, and I'm not taking shots at anybody that I know. but and they start internalizing this, and then they're shocked, right? Because I think what happened to a lot of people in 2016, I think we saw this also in our own election, is that people were shocked.
Oh, 100%.
Why did this happen? And I think people forget that, like, not everybody's living the life you're living. And when you're living like Daniel Blake or Katie, you might not even believe in politicians, but you're probably so desperate that, like,
you're desperate.
Like, I just need anything to change. You know, I need just.
I'll give you one example of. I think I was watching some Vice documentary, and they were in coal country. And this coal worker was saying, you know, I honestly preferred Hillary Clinton, like at first, until she said she was going to do away with coal. And this is a person who was living in Eastern Kentucky. And then he's like, saying you were going to do away with coal with my livelihood. I had no choice but to vote for Trump. And I was like, well, you can't really argue against that, because how can you essentially vilify someone for being so concerned about what the hell they're going to do for a living, right? I mean, that's most people's number one priority. And so, like, what I'm saying by that, it's like, it's not always so clear cut. Most people's primary concern is, how is this going to affect, you know, my lifestyle? Like, in terms of, like, how am I going to be able to provide food for, like, my family? And that's a lot. And so that's why it gets very, it shocks a lot of people, but who don't necessarily have that experience or live in Eastern Kentucky or a coal miner. But, you know, honestly, that's how people are going to see things or vote sometimes. It's like, how is it going to impact me?
Yeah. And I think, like you said, with the I'm happy you brought up the austerity, because I think the timing of this movie is almost like a crystallization of all those austerity measures that were put in place when the euro had the Eurozone crisis. And people were told, we need to tighten the belt, we have a lot of debt. But in the end, it was people who were already being disenfranchised by, let's say, the modern economy. I'm not even going to blame either globalization or nationalism, but there were people already on the fringes that were the ones who were paying the price, while others, you know, they were fine tightening the belt, because, like you said, they weren't really going to the unemployment benefits. They weren't really going to the public system for services, right? They were fine, you know? And I think that's why, like, when I hear all the time, like, politicians say we need to tighten the belt, I always ask, for who exactly? Because it seems like when we say tighten the belt, it's always other people who need to be squeezed, not others.
Sure. I mean, during the 2008 bailout, it's not like people at the top were necessarily going to be the ones footing the bill.
Why did it go that far, dude? It was coronavirus bailout.
Yeah. Okay. It did. Well, that's just the most, like, obvious example, I guess, at least here in the U.S. You know, who ends up footing the bill is the Treasury, which ends up coming back to the taxpayers.
Don't worry, we have the coronavirus one. Don't worry. As soon as they got taken care of, I saw. So
I
my
don't
little
even want
tangent,
to
my
bring
little
up.
tangent
Go ahead.
there is that I what I noticed, this is completely factual.
Sheer
And I'm
incompetence.
no, as in like once the initial packages were sent and they made sure that I'm not even gonna say the industry, certain industries were taken care of. I saw suddenly the talk going to like, oh, we need to tighten the belt. We had the fastest, like usually it takes years to get to this like back and forth. We went from we need to inject everything. I'm gonna quote somebody here, 5 trillion to we need to tighten the belt. Like what? It's crazy how like that happened like in the span of
I mean,
3 months.
there's a lot of people you could call out for this for just being completely, quite frankly, incompetent of the way a lot of the economic damage and bailouts have been handled thus far.
Yeah, it's in 08. You're right.
I don't think that
go back to your 08 example. It's the same deal, right? Like we make sure certain people are taken care of because they're important to our economy, our society. But other people at the bottom, well, it is what it is. I mean, literally, that's what I think. Like it is what it is.
Although the one thing that has shocked me recently, in terms of a slight amount of justice, has been what we discussed earlier, which was the charging those futures traders for financial manipulation and fraud. That has blown my mind. That I never thought we would see a day when our government would actually use RICO against some of these white-collar crimes. It's blown my mind a little bit reading that.
Yeah, but the penalty is still a slap on the wrist. But okay, I don't want to get into that.
Still though, the fact that they use RICO, which is taking down mobsters, the mafia, that's what blew my mind that they were actually going with that level of attack.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, we'll leave it at that. So I think that was pretty much it. We covered almost everything in the film, how gut wrenching this movie was at times. But I think it's time that we should get into the final ratings.
Yeah, I think you should start that because I have a little story about my rating.
Sure. Gosh, where would I even rate this? I would probably give this between. I don't think it was quite a 9, but I would give this between 8.5 and a 9. I thought this film was brutal and raw. I thought at times it was a little bit slow, but that was sort of deliberate, I think, for the style, because they wanted to portray this as not flashy, but sort of everyday life, and how a lot of people are just getting left on the sidelines from the system. I thought the acting by the female actress was superb. I thought like some of the scenes, especially that we talked about, like at the food bank, was just, she nailed it. Like I had to turn away for a second at that. And then when she was caught working at the brothel, that was also that was a scene that really gets you as well. So I really thought that she was amazing as an actress in this film. I thought Blake's performance was great too, and the little kids. And honestly, just their sort of critique at what was going on in Britain at that point in time was just, I mean, it was really hard to sort of poke holes in it a bit. I just thought it was a bit slow at times, and that's why I couldn't necessarily give it a higher rating personally.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna say my score at the end.
All right, go ahead.
The score here. So I watched this on Monday, and I was like, this is a good movie, solid. I'm a harsh critic, right? And I was gonna say 7.5, but then the week went on a little bit, and I kept thinking of some of these scenes: the food bank, when Danielle discovers she's a prostitute, the bureaucracy, and I was just like, these scenes, like,
they stick with you.
They stick with you, like, and that's a sign of a good film. Mediocre films you forget like instantly. And even some good films, like in that 7.5, 8 range, you tend to forget like a lot of the details. Like let's be honest, like even I'm thinking of like what's the film that we both liked? What's it called? Big Fish.
Mm-hmm.
That was the title, right? Like I remember some things, but now times passes. I'm like, well, I'm remembering less and less. But there's some scenes in this movie I feel like I'm never gonna forget. And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's an 8. And then I was like, is it better than Trainspotting? I was like, well, they're different.
Oh.
But I was just like, no, that's what. So my final score is 8.5 because I feel like they're the same tier. And
yeah,
I was just like, this film really grows on you. and it was surprising to me because I
Sure.
thought I was like, I have a
No,
good rating. 7.5 is a good rating, and I was just like, but I give it the extra point because I think this is a movie that I think more people need to see. I think people are getting really too disengaged with, forget the government, but with your neighbor, with your like just people in your community that, how many people actually who live in like Manhattan really walk by a food bank? I bet none. And
how many people who live in Manhattan go to Brooklyn or Queens, dude? I can't imagine it's very high. Dude,
no,
and I don't live in New York, but I've heard enough from New Yorkers or about New York to know that, most people they tend to stick within their specific borough that they're in within New York City.
Yeah,
and so you don't really know what's going on in here adjacent boroughs, which blows my mind. But they're like, well, once you get out, it's almost like you're lost. You're in the woods. I'm like, wow, okay, it's pretty interesting, but it's a different dynamic.
Yeah,
but yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people are just disengaged with others around them.
Yeah, and even I think this especially hits home with people who are at different social classes, right? People who are probably enjoying everybody has their challenges. I'm not gonna say nobody doesn't, but people who are maybe who are maybe living like where you are living in North Carolina in a certain bubble, they're not gonna understand why.
We're in a big bubble.
They're not gonna understand. They're not gonna understand why people, like you were saying earlier, in Eastern Kentucky, in Wisconsin, which you know well too, or Michigan, why they're voting a certain way. And to them, they just think it's xenophobia. They're stupid, And this is high level, but I think this movie, and it's sad. I said this earlier, right? It's aged well because we're in another big crisis, and there's a lot of things that we're gonna see more stories like this. Because that's what's going to happen again. It's going to.
It might get worse. Yeah.
And, like I said, it might get worse. And so, with that kind of context, I was like, this film is probably, it's sad to say, but it's probably going to age very well.
And I will say that within this film, I get what they were doing. There were a couple comedic moments. I wish there were a few more to lighten the mood a bit because it's very heavy, and because there wasn't enough sort of comedic moments, I think the rewatchability was not super high, right? Because it just leaves you feeling kind of down, and I get why it's very this is a deep subject matter, and these are things that go on. But I think to balance that, you need a little bit of humor at times.
Yeah, that's why I didn't think it was I've seen some other Ken Loach films, and I like them more, and I rewatch them more. I think this one, you're right. It's really a downer, and that's why I have a hard time saying it's rewatchable. I know we both value rewatchability, but now I'm starting to think that probably why film is very subjective. Because
I think people need to watch this film. Yeah. I think people need to watch this movie, but it's just personally, it's not rewatchable.
Oh, this is not high on my list of rewatching, but this is a movie. But that's why I mean, why film reviews I think is very subjective, because I think up until this episode, I think we've been valuing almost as a category. We don't have a rubric, but we both kind of agree that rewatchability is kind of important in movies, right? Mm-hmm. Can you enjoy this? I would not enjoy watching this again.
Yeah, let me ask you this: would you read?
More important culturally.
Oh yeah,
100%. You have to.
But I have a question: would you be able to rewatch Trainspotting?
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's interesting, right? Because they're both at the same tier that you put in your rating system, but they're at that tier for different reasons. I think this one's not rewatchable; it's more culturally relevant at this point in time. Trainspotting it had some really good moments. And it was dark at times, but it had some humor to balance it out. And that's why it was different. And it's interesting, though, because both those films, actually, in back-to-back weeks, they're both British films.
Yeah. So. I picked it because it was a British film. But it's because I didn't watch it and didn't know much about other than the trailer. Mm-hmm. I had a gist, and I knew the track record of the director, so I knew it was going to be at worst a 7, at best 9-ish range. But yeah, to your point, it's I feel if our society had progressed, in some ways, I feel this movie, this is why I think it's relative. It's always relative, these ratings, no matter we do it or New York Times does it or whoever does it. Because if it wasn't for, I think, some of the context, there's probably a little notch lower. But unfortunately, and it's sad to say, we haven't really gone better, even here across the pond, with these issues. And these films, they're probably, like you were saying earlier, it's probably going to get worse, so they're more relevant now than they were then, even maybe. So it just blows my mind. The time
Well,
passes. We're
based
getting
on,
older,
on
but
the based on the sheer lack of competence within our politics, I think it's going to get worse, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Me too.
Yeah. Anyway, those are our final. Do you have anything else to add?
No, that's
I think I pretty much summed it up.
that's a good period on that.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode where we reviewed I, Daniel Blake, a 2016 film that focuses a lot on the socioeconomic class, like lower class, and the economic hardships that a lot of people face, and how bureaucracy doesn't always rule in their favor, unfortunately. So, yeah. Anyway, stay tuned for next week, where we'll be reviewing a different film that is not quite. It's a little cheerier film from what I've heard. I haven't actually seen it before, but stay tuned. I won't say it now, but it's a film that influenced both Spike Lee and John Singleton during their directing. So take care.
Yeah.